Happy Friday to everyone. Welcome back to the book review, Chapter 2, Lady Colin Campbell's book. Disclaimer, full disclaimer can be found below in the description. Please like, share, and subscribe. All right, let's get started. For a couple whose backgrounds were so radically different in worldly terms, Meghan and Harry were born to parents whose unions shared surprisingly similarities. Both the Prince and Princess of Wales and Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Markle were very mismatched. Once their marriages failed, both sets of parents would try their best to spare their children from suffering from the fallout, in the process exuberating its effects in unexpected ways. Had Harry and Meghan been born to couples who were more compatible, more evenly matched, and more aware of the need to provide stronger boundaries and less indulgence, it is unlikely that either the Duke or Duchess of Sussex would have ever had as much in common as they do. Okay, excuse me for turning pages here. All right, up till then, theirs had been an extremely relaxed household, but as tensions developed between the workaholic Tom Markle Sr. and the neglected Doria, she too emulated the habits of her stepdaughter and started to come and go as she pleased, often parking Meghan with her mother or Tom's Jr. Meghan seems to have had candy-coated and a more critic scenario, and moreover was doing so for good reason. The whispers are that Doria not only realized that she didn't want to be alone with her husband, who was never around and took her for granted when he was, but that she actually didn't want to be with a husband at all. Both sides of Meghan's family have confirmed that while she was growing up, nothing was too good for her. Her father spoiled her from the time she was a baby. Although her mother laid down boundaries, she also spoiled her, as did the extended family. She was well liked by all and was friendly with many, but she had no actual circle of friends. She felt isolated for all her superficial popularity and was therefore already functioning as a solitary and independent unit. As she put it, my high school had cliques: the black girls, the white girls, the Filipino and the Latino girls. Being biracial, I felt somewhere in between. So every day during lunch, I busied myself with meetings, French club, student body, whatever one could possibly do between noon and 1 p.m. I was there, not so that I was more involved, but so that I wouldn't have to eat alone. Although Meghan had a best friend, Nikki Pretty, with whom she had been schooled since the age of 2, and they would obviously have lunch together some of the time, her statements indicate that she felt that her racial identity was a problem with which she was finding it difficult to deal. And it goes on to say, excuse me just a moment. However, rather than feeling sorry for herself or becoming embittered by her circumstances, she was already positive and self-confident enough to find resourceful solutions which kept her occupied and gained her approbation of her teachers. The message one receives is that this early solution to the problem of isolation helped her to develop a self-reliance and independence that not only provided her with positive feedback, but also hid her isolation behind a facade of affability. For all the care she showed to strangers, Meghan had trouble behaving similarly toward her father. Nikki Pretty remembered that as Meg got older, she had to parent Tom a little more, and she just couldn't do that. Despite the diplomatic tightrope she walked as she carried messages back and forth between her civil parents, Meghan had always been the one both parents had taken care of, and she did not take well to having those roles reversed. Her refusal to do for her father what she was doing for strangers give her an invaluable insight into her character and shows that even at an early age, she knew where she wanted to establish boundaries. She enjoyed going to the soup kitchens. This was gratifying for both the giver and the recipient and explains why so many people who feel alienated work with the less fortunate. Given to strangers was one thing. Given to loved ones who she felt should be giving to her was something else. As she herself used to admit, Tom Sr. instilled the belief in her that she could achieve anything she wanted as long as she strove for it. Intensely hardworking, courageous, standing up for what he believed in, and forthright, he encouraged her to have a voice and to use it. Disparate members of the family attribute the remarkable degree of self-confidence Meghan possesses and possessed from her youth to the encouragement of her father gave her to cultivate her judgment, trust it, and act upon it. Like all myths, cause and effect are problematic, and the numbers don't quite add up, but the basics are indisputable. In 1995, Meghan saw a commercial for Ivory Clear dishwashing liquid with the tagline, "Women all over America are fighting greasy pots and pans." According to an account she gave at the United Nations conference in the years when she was still a relatively unknown actress, 2 boys from my class said, "Yeah, that's where women belong, in the kitchen." I remember feeling shocked and angry and also just feeling hurt. It just wasn't right, and something needed to be done. Thomas Markle Sr. encouraged her to write letters of complaint, which, by her own account, she did, mailing them to the First Lady Hillary Clinton, the high-profile women's rights advocate Gloria Allred, and Procter & Gamble, the manufacturers of Ivory Clear dishwashing liquid. While the First Lady and the controversial lawyer responded, Procter & Gamble did not. According to Meghan, a month later, they replaced the ad with one that said, "People all over America are fighting greasy pots and pans." This led her to believe that her complaint had been responsible for the change. As she put it in the UN speech, "It was at that moment I realized the magnitude of my actions. At the age of 11, which we know she was really 14 there, I had created my small level of impact by standing up to equality." So Meghan assumed that her letters had brought about this change. But it says, firstly, Meghan was not even 11 in 1995, but 14. Secondly, Hillary Clinton was not the First Lady in 1992 when Meghan was 11, but became First Lady in 1993 when Meghan was 12. Thirdly, there is absolutely no evidence that her sole letter altered the course of history. Procter & Gamble indubitably changed its tagline, but it was optimistic of Meghan to suppose that it did so as a result of one letter written by an 11 or 14-year-old Meghan Markle. Lastly, no advertising agency could replace an advertisement in only a month. It said that Meghan had she suggested that hers might have been one of the many letters that led to the change, and that she not provided such a tight timeline, which proved that the letter could not have had any impact whatsoever, she would have been on a firmer ground by saying this. In fairness to Meghan, she is a creature of Hollywood. The values there are very different from those of a palace. Fantasy and self-promotion are not frowned upon, nor is exaggeration, all of which are viewed as valid tools for getting your message across. The early era on Meghan's part would come back to haunt her once she made the transition from modest Hollywood stardom to the superstardom with which being a member of the British royal family invested her, because it was living proof that she was prone to exaggeration. This would doubtless make no dent in the way that she was viewed in North America, where Hollywood and its ways have greater acceptance than they do in Britain. But on this side of the Atlantic, it did alert people to the fact that the new Duchess of Sussex had both a propensity for exaggeration and a flair for dramatics in a way that the British found very suspect. According to Nanaki Pretty, for mispronouncing her name before, Meghan's best friend from childhood, attention, approbation, and applause have always been the driving forces for her. Meg always wanted to be a star. She said, despite this, she was normal and likable, even though she did exhibit some of the grit that would later on lead to her outstanding success. Okay, Nikki confirmed that the royal family was something she found fascinating. She had one of Princess Diana's book on her bookshelf. She watched Diana's funeral, was moved to tears, as were her friends, and so obsessed did she become that she and another friend, Susie, got a hold of old videos of Diana's 1981 wedding to Prince Charles and decided to emulate her humanitarian example by collecting clothes and toys to be distributed amongst the less privileged children. The lesson she was learning was that even the most stylish and glamorous women show how special they are only in their personal presentation, not only in their personal presentation, but through humanitarianism. She has found her role model and used to love Princess Diaries, films about a commoner who becomes part of the royal family. She was very taken with that idea, and she wants to be Princess Diana 2.0, Nanaki Pretty said. Sorry, it's spelled two different ways in here. Of course, Meghan had no idea what the future held for her, nor she would one day have an office in Buckingham Palace, or that she would chafe against palace restrictions in much the same way the mother-in-law she would never meet had resisted hers. In 1990, Tom had won $750,000 in the California state lottery, although much of it was dissipated in an ill-advised investment in a jewelry business with a friend from Chicago. It nevertheless provided him with the means to work less and indulge his children even more than he had previously done before. All members of the Markle family confirm that Tom was always exceedingly generous. Tom Jr. was given the funds to start up a flower shop, and Samantha was bought a second car to replace the first gift that she had written off, while Meghan's school fees, always expensive, were covered more easily out of the proceeds of the win. She and her father had done and would continue to do whatever it took to enhance her prospects, from having expensive orthodonture so that she would have a perfect smile to having a bulbous tip of her nose refined via plastic surgery. Sorry, skipping over, going over to the highlighted areas. It says about Meghan's college. Her friend explains, the way to tell how neatly Meghan resemblances fit the story, Meg's inventions are too tailor-made to be reliable. People just don't act the way she says. Once you know her, you can tell which stories are Meghan's and which really happened. So they're saying that she had a tendency, her friends, to embellish the truth. Now, this is about her internship. Attitude and personality, however, were not sufficient to enter the State Department. One also has to pass the Foreign Service Officers test, which Meghan set while in Argentina. To her chagrin, she failed it. However, she had planned to fly to Madrid at the end of her internship. So after she failed it, she decided that wasn't something that she wanted to do, and that now she decided she wanted to be an actress. Okay, going over, this chapter 2 is just a lot of praise for, and I'm trying to give you information that maybe you don't already know. So give me just a second to get over, having to turn quite a few pages here. It's hard to get through chapter 2 because, as you can imagine, I don't want to hear a bunch of glowing things, and neither do you, about Meghan. Okay, and then it just goes on. Harry found, and it talks a little bit about Harry, and when he attended the officer training course at Sandhurst, was intended to instill confidence and bring out leadership qualities in officers. According to Major General Paul Nansen, commanded of the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, since 2015, and the General Officer commanding recruiting and initial training since 2018, it's about teaching new habits and hopefully helping you shake off old ones. In April of 2006, Harry, by then considerably more straightened out than he had been when he entered Sandhurst, completed his training. He was commissioned a cornet, second lieutenant in the Blues and Royals. In attendance at his graduation were his grandfather, the Duke of Edinburgh, his father and stepmother, William, who had recently enrolled in Sandhurst, having graduated from St. Andrews University in Scotland. Also present were Tiggy, that was his nanny, Mark Dwyer, and Jamie Pinkerton, a former equerry to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, who had been appointed both boys' private secretary. All right. So that's everything really that I think you want to hear in chapter 2. I'm getting ready to create and upload chapter 3 later this evening. Please like at this time, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. And I appreciate you watching. Thanks so much, and I'll be back with you guys very